Hello, welcome to Clear Process Solutions WebTips. My name is Connor Orzen, and I'm an RPA developer here at CPS. Today's topic will be modifying UiPath selectors. The goal of this WebTips is to give a basic understanding of selectors and the ways they can be manipulated to dynamically and reliably find user interface elements. We also will cover best practices for finding and configuring selectors in UiPath. So some key items: what is a selector? What types of selectors are there? And how to edit selectors to become reliable and dynamic. Before we get into what a selector is, so why is it important? So the majority of UiPath processes are built on user interface elements. That is, when a bot has to kind of select an element on an application or browser to mimic human actions, it needs to be able to find that element. So the selector is, as seen here to the right, kind of an address for that element. It gives us attributes based on an XML fragment. So by definition, selectors store the attributes of a graphical user interface element and its parents in the shape of an XML fragment. The selector property is of type string and allows for editing, which is very important, and we will discuss on the next slide. Types of selectors. So we have dynamic selectors and static selectors. On this first page, we have a static selector. So you can see that it is a static string here to the right with nothing dynamic about it, just a Chrome executable. The title of the Chrome page is introduction, and they selected the header logo. If we come down here, this is a dynamic selector. So we would replace name. Instead of being a hard-coded file being static, we can input a variable in there that we could decipher earlier in the process and feed that variable into the selector to specifically identify a user interface element. Further modifying selectors, we have wildcards. So these are the most useful of this whole presentation, in my opinion. I use them all the time. It keeps your selectors reliable. So wildcards are symbols that enable you to replace zero or multiple characters in a string. These can be quite useful when dealing with dynamically changing attributes in a selector. You have the asterisk, which replaces zero or more characters, or you have the question mark, which can just replace one single character. In this example to the right, they replace the title of the notepad executable to a asterisk. So that would change it. Say it was an untitled document, this would just replace the untitled and it would still connect to a notepad named untitled. So now I will do a quick demo of some of the topics just discussed. So first, we will be automating a work item process. So here we have Acme System 1. This is just some dummy data for UiPath training. So basically we have a bunch of work items here, and I will take the bot and loop through all of this dynamically and select each of these and highlight the work item details. If this was an end-to-end process, we could take this scraped data and output it to a SQL database, an Excel sheet, or email it to an end user. For today's demo process, we will just highlight it. Okay, so now you know what that looks like. We'll take you into UiPath Studio. Before I run this process, I'll give you a quick overview of what it looks like and the activities used. So we start with a use browser. This will just attach us to the selector for the Chrome executable that's open. So you'll see the Chrome executable and Acme System 1 work items. So this is a static selector. I wanted this to only connect to the one Chrome browser. If, say, this was a asterisk and it could connect to anything, it'd probably have issues since I have multiple tabs open. Next in the line of activities, we will extract table data from this web page. So this is a pretty neat activity. It extracts table data out of a web page. So all you have to do for this is just add data, click anywhere in a table on the browser, Would you like to extract all the columns from this table? Yes. So UiPath automatically recognized that this is a table, in fact. So now, if we want to verify that it extracted everything we wanted, we have all this in here. We can just check that real quick. Date everything. Okay. And if we wanted to continue to extract all of these pages, we could. I'm not going to today, so I'll just do max pages as 1. And save. Going forward, now we have the table index, which I will dynamically feed to this click activity. I'm starting this index at 2 because on this web page, every web page will be different, but this has the table row as 1 for the headers and 2 is the first line of data. So I just have that starting at 2 to not deal with the header. Now for the fun part, we will use a for each row in data table activity to loop through the work items data table. Our first activity is a click, and this is where I utilize a dynamic variable inside of the selector. So each loop through it will increase by 1, but I feed the table index into my selector and for table row. So for the first one, it'll select the second row, third, fourth, and so on. And after that, I highlight the work item details, which you will see in 1 second. And we also iterate by 1. So we will click on view, we will highlight the work item details, and we will go back and do it again. So I will give that a run real quick, make sure everything's all set up. Yep. Clicks, highlight. So as we iterate, we obviously will go down the table as the index increases. This should wrap up in shortly. Great, so finished executing. That is the advantage of a dynamic variable. So we had 1 click activity and it worked for 10 rows. And that's all thanks to inputting this dynamic variable right here. If we were to not use a dynamic variable here, we'd have a lot of issues because we would select this. And if we go into UI Explorer, table row. That's what we want. So now we validate. Okay, got it. If we don't pass that dynamic variable in for table row, if we were to run this again, it would just iterate on that first row every time what I just selected. So it would iterate 10 times because of the extracted data has 10 items in it, but it would only click this one investigation because the selector is not dynamic and it's only iterating, but still on 2. So that's the dynamic selector. If we go into our highlight activity, we can see that I use the asterisk. The asterisk was important for me right here because the work item ID, the type, the status, the date, that's all variable data. That's not going to be the same for each one. So if we come in here and we click the investigate button, we come in here and we'll see the work item details. These aren't the same for each one, but the element in order to grab all this, we had to specify that we wanted the work ID type, status, date. With that being different for each one, we had to use asterisks to say we don't want 83287388. We just want any number in here in between work item and type. So that way I could come in here and grab different data for each work item and export all of that. And you'll see here, I use that by using these asterisks through here. One before, one after wild, one before type, one before and after status, and one before and after date. And that allows us to have a dynamic selector. That being said, feel free to reach out if you have any more questions, and I hope you enjoyed the web tips.